Elira Voss woke before sunrise, as she did every day now, in a small room above the stables that smelled of hay and cold stone. She did not complain. She had learned, over the past 2 years, that complaining changed nothing except her stepmother's mood, and her stepmother's mood was already bad enough. 3 years ago, Elira had been the daughter of a respected merchant. Her father, Edmund Voss, had loved her fiercely, teaching her to read from his own worn books, and taking her on quiet walks through the orchard behind their house. Then he had married Countess Marguerite, a woman with a soft voice and a hard heart, and less than a year later, he had died suddenly of a fever no physician could explain. From that day forward, Elira's life became smaller and smaller. Marguerite did not send her away outright. Instead, she reduced her, piece by piece, until the girl who once had tutors and silk dresses was scrubbing floors and mending linens in the very house where she had been born. "You should be grateful," Marguerite told her one morning, watching Elira kneel by the hearth. "Many girls in your position would have been thrown into the street." Elira said nothing. She had learned that silence was safer than truth. It was on a gray autumn morning that Marguerite called her into the drawing room and told her, without warmth, that she had arranged a position for her in the household of Duke Alaric Kane. "A maid's position," Marguerite said, as though she were doing Elira a great favor. "You will live there, you will work there, you will not return here unless I send for you." Elira understood, though Marguerite never said it plainly, that she was not being given an opportunity. She was being removed. Whatever plans her stepmother had for the Voss estate, they did not include her. She packed a single trunk with what little remained of her old life, a few books, a locket that had belonged to her mother, and a plain gray dress that did not fit the woman she once might have become. Then she left the only home she had ever known, and traveled 2 days by carriage to the grand estate of the Duke. The manor was unlike anything Elira had seen since her father's death. Its stone walls rose high against the sky, and its gardens stretched farther than she could see from the servants' entrance. She was given a uniform, a narrow bed in the attic quarters, and a long list of duties that began before dawn and ended long after dark. The housekeeper, a stern but not unkind woman named Mrs. Ashworth, explained the rules quickly. "Keep your eyes down, speak only when spoken to. Never enter the family wing unless instructed." The Duke, Mrs. Ashworth added in a lower voice, was a serious man who valued order above all else, and new maids who caused trouble did not last long in his household. Elira intended to cause no trouble at all. She wanted only to work quietly, save what little money she could, and perhaps, one day, find a way to build a life of her own, far from Marguerite's reach. For the first week, she succeeded. She rose early, worked hard, and moved through the manor like a shadow, unnoticed by anyone above the rank of housekeeper. She scrubbed the long hallways, polished silver until her arms ached, and carried linens up and down staircases that seemed to multiply the longer she stayed. It was an ordinary task, on an ordinary afternoon, that changed everything. She had been sent to close a high window in the Duke's private study, a room she had been told, more than once, never to enter unless it was empty. She believed it was. The Duke, she had been told, was away at a meeting with his steward and would not return until evening. She was wrong. As she reached up to pull the heavy window shut, her sleeve caught on an iron hook fixed to the frame. The old fabric tore with a soft ripping sound, and the cuff fell away from her shoulder, exposing the pale skin of her collarbone and the small crescent-shaped mark that had been there since birth, a birthmark her mother, whom she barely remembered, used to say was a sign of good fortune. "What are you doing in here?" The voice was low and controlled, but it startled her so badly she nearly lost her balance on the stool. She turned to find a tall man standing in the doorway, dressed simply, but unmistakably in the manner of nobility. His dark eyes moved from her face to the torn sleeve, and then, for a moment that stretched far too long, to the mark on her collarbone. Elira quickly pulled her sleeve back into place, her face burning with embarrassment. "Forgive me, my lord. I was told the room was empty. I only meant to close the window before the storm came in." The man did not answer right away. He was staring at her in a way that made her deeply uncomfortable, though not unkindly, more as though he had seen something he did not expect and could not quite believe. "Your name," he said finally. "Elira, my lord." Illyria Voss. Something shifted in his expression, though she could not name what it was. "You may go," he said, his voice quieter now. "I will speak to Mrs. Ashworth about your duties." Illyria left the study as quickly as she could, certain she had made some terrible mistake and would be dismissed by morning. Instead, the following day, Mrs. Ashworth informed her, with visible confusion, that the Duke himself had requested she be moved to serve in his personal wing. "I don't understand it," Mrs. Ashworth admitted. "He's never taken a personal interest in staffing before. But it's not my place to question him, and it shouldn't be yours either." Illyria accepted the change with quiet unease. She did not know what she had done to draw the Duke's attention, and in her experience, being noticed by powerful people rarely ended well. What she did not know was that Duke Alaric Kane had spent the past 13 years searching, quietly and without success, for a child who was believed to have died in infancy, a child who had, in fact, disappeared under circumstances he had never fully trusted. His cousin, Duchess Isolde, had died suddenly when her daughter was only a few months old. The official account said illness. Alaric had never believed it. He had been close to Isolde, close enough to know she had feared for her life in the months before her death, close enough to know she had spoken, more than once, of protecting her daughter from certain relatives who stood to gain a great deal from the child's absence. When the household staff reported that both mother and infant had died together, Alaric had grieved, but he had also doubted. There had been no body shown for the child, only hurried explanations, and a funeral closed to all but immediate family. He had asked questions for years afterward, and each time, he had been told, gently but firmly, to let the matter rest. He never had, and now, standing in his study, he had seen on the shoulder of a servant girl the exact same crescent-shaped mark that Isolde had shown him once, laughing, on her newborn daughter's collarbone, calling it the mark of the Kane women, passed down for generations. It could have been coincidence. Alaric told himself that, repeatedly, in the days that followed, but he could not let it go, not when the girl's age matched, not when something in her eyes reminded him so strongly of his lost cousin. He began, carefully and quietly, to investigate. He learned first that Illyria Voss had not been born to Edmund Voss and his first wife, as the official records suggested, but had been brought into the household as an infant, with documents that were, on closer inspection, inconsistent in ways that suggested they had been altered. He learned, through a contact with connections to the old ducal records, that a substantial payment had passed from an unnamed source to Edmund Voss in the same year that Duchess Isolde had died. He learned, most troublingly of all, that Countess Marguerite, Illyria's stepmother, was distantly related to the very family that had stood to inherit Isolde's holdings, had her daughter never been found. Piece by piece, a picture formed that made Alaric's blood run cold. Isolde had not died of illness. Her death had been arranged, and her infant daughter had not died at all. She had been quietly given away, hidden in plain sight, raised by a kind merchant who likely never fully understood what he had agreed to protect. Alaric did not confront Illyria immediately. He wanted to be certain, not only for his own sake, but for hers. If he was wrong, he would be raising hopes, or fears, that could shatter a life already fragile enough. If he was right, he needed proof strong enough to protect her from the people who had once wanted her gone. In the weeks that followed, Illyria noticed that the Duke watched her more closely than any employer should watch a servant. He asked her small questions, about her childhood, her father, the mother she barely remembered, questions that seemed idle, but were, in truth, carefully placed. She did not know what to make of him. He was not cruel, as she had feared he might be. If anything, he was unusually gentle with her, correcting her mistakes quietly rather than reporting them, and once, when she injured her hand carrying firewood, insisting she see the household physician immediately rather than simply continue her work. She told herself it meant nothing. Noblemen were often strange in ways she did not understand, and she had learned not to expect kindness to last. But kindness, in this case, did last, and eventually, Alaric could no longer keep his suspicions to himself. He called her to his study one evening, the same room where he had first seen the mark on her shoulder. On his desk lay a portrait, old and slightly faded, of a young woman with dark hair and familiar eyes. "Do you know who this is?" he asked. Elira shook her head. "Her name was Isolde. She was my cousin, and the Duchess of this house before her death 13 years ago." He paused. "She had a daughter. That daughter was believed to have died with her." Elira did not understand why he was telling her this, until he turned the portrait toward the light and asked her, quietly, to show him her collarbone again. She hesitated, but something in his voice, not commanding, but pleading, made her comply. He studied the mark for a long moment, then closed his eyes, as though something long carried had finally settled. "I believe," he said slowly, "that you are her daughter. That you are the true heir of this house, hidden away to protect you, and later abandoned to poverty by people who never intended you to know the truth." Elira's first instinct was disbelief. It was too large a thing to accept, too strange a story for a girl who had spent the last 3 years scrubbing floors. But as Alaric explained what he had uncovered, the altered records, the payment to her father, Marguerite's distant but damning connections, the pieces began to fit together in ways that frightened her more than they comforted her. It explained why her father, in his final months, had grown quiet and worried, speaking once of a debt he could never fully repay, though she had never understood what he meant. It explained why Marguerite had been so eager to send her away, not simply out of cruelty, but out of fear that the truth might surface if Elira remained too close to people who could recognize her. What followed was not swift or simple. Alaric moved carefully, gathering evidence, consulting men of law he trusted completely, and slowly building a case strong enough to withstand challenge. Marguerite, when confronted, denied everything at first, but the forged records and the traceable payment left little room for doubt. Her connection to the family who had orchestrated Isolde's death was distant, but undeniable once examined closely, and her role in keeping Elira hidden and disinherited could no longer be excused as simple cruelty. The scandal, when it broke, shook the region for weeks. But for Elira, the noise of it mattered less than the quiet moments that came after. The moment she was formally recognized as the last surviving heir of Duchess Isolde's line. The moment she stood in the same hall where she had once carried firewood, no longer in a maid's uniform, but dressed as the woman she had always been beneath the years of hardship. She did not choose vengeance, though she would have had every right to. Instead, she chose to rebuild, first her own sense of self, and then, slowly, a relationship with the household and the man who had refused to let her disappear. Alaric never spoke of what he felt for her during those difficult weeks, not wanting to burden her further while she was still learning who she truly was. But as the months passed and Elira grew steadier in her new life, something quiet and honest grew between them, not born of titles or inheritance, but of the simple fact that he had seen her, truly seen her, when the rest of the world had chosen to look away. On a clear spring morning, nearly a year after she had first arrived at the manor with a single trunk and a torn sleeve, Elira stood once more in the Duke's study, no longer as a servant, but as its rightful mistress. The crescent mark on her collarbone was no longer something to hide. It was, at last, simply a part of who she was, proof not of a secret, but of a truth that had finally been allowed to come home.